So in this lecture, we're going to be continuing on with chapter 12.3. We're continuing on the topic of interactions between organisms. So really quick, you maybe think back, you probably just watched the last video, but think back, what are the different kinds of interactions that species can have, and what are their net effects on the organisms that are taking place in them? Are they positive? Are they negative? Are they neutral? Um, So this is talking about species interactions having an impact or being a driver of natural selection. So if you guys remember from way back once upon a time, one of the things that you need for natural selection is competition. So the interaction between two species does not affect all individuals within the two populations equally, which leads to differences, which means to some organisms being selected out. What factors lead to different effects on individuals, on different individuals? How can these interactions lead to natural selection? So just some things to be thinking about while we're going through this stuff. So interactions on species involve many things affected by phenotypic characteristics. Okay, so again, if you're competing with another organism, your phenotypic characteristics, what you look like, are you tall, are you short, are you large, are you small, is going to have an impact on those interactions you have with another species. Okay, so and again, these phenotypic characteristics are variable, which leads to differences to the type and degree of interactions which can occur. So I'm going back to birds because it's a very easy topic to talk about when it comes to natural selection. It's very modern in terms of what kinds of studies have been done on it and what kinds of things have actually been seen there. So sorry for beating a dead horse or a dead bird or whatever. But we're talking about birds that eat seeds, and they're eating seeds of a specific plant. Okay, seed size is a heritable characteristic. So if you have a mom plant and a dad plant, which is a dumb way of thinking of it, but if you have two plants that have large seeds and they reproduce, their offspring is going to have large seeds. Okay, but seed size is also highly variable, and some plants are getting large seeds, some plants are getting small seeds. Again, like I just said a minute ago, the phenotypic characteristics are variable, which leads to differences in kinds of interactions that can happen. All right, we have this wide range of seed sizes. All right, and this is what that kind of looks like. This is the original distribution of seed sizes within our plant population. And they're fairly normally distributed. You see here, you have some really small ones, some fairly large ones. Most are pretty average sized in between that. So the larger the seed is, basically, the harder it is for a bird to eat. Okay, if the birds are unable to break the sort of seed coat, if they're unable to get through, it just passes right through and it doesn't give anything to the bird. The other thing that's variable here is the bill size within our bird population. Our birds prefer to eat smaller seeds. All right, that's sort of the parameters of this thing that we're going to be running through. This is what our bird population looks like. They have a whole wide variety of bill sizes. Again, normally distributed around some average. Okay, you get some big ones, some small ones, most are average. So the birds prefer those smaller seeds, and so these are what they're eating. This graph represents the seeds that are actually getting eaten by the birds, and you'll see here they're selecting these smaller ones, right? And so what's left over when they eat all of the smaller ones? Well, the large ones are left over, and so that's what you wind up having a lot of. Again, it's a heritable characteristic. If you have two plants with large seeds, you're going to wind up with offspring that have large seeds. And so the birds eat all of the small seeds, you wind up with a bunch of large seeds. Okay, birds are reducing the fitness of the small seeded plants, which leads to different phenotypes. It leads to larger seeds with sort of harder shells. All right, and what kind of interaction is this, by the way? What do you think the kind of interaction where the birds are eating the seeds? You answer that for yourself, pause the video or whatever. It's a pretty simple one. This is predation. Okay, this is predation. Birds are preying upon those plants or on those seeds. So, and again, in this scenario, the birds are the agent of selection, which over time is causing the plants to actually change their characteristics. So you can see as a result of the selective processes, by the time this has been running for probably quite a while, but by the time this has been running for a while, you can see that the seed size has undergone this directional selective process, and the seeds are becoming quite a bit larger than they were at the start. Um, so again, this is just a synopsis of the whole thing, basically, that we just talked about. Change in phenotypic distribution of plant population changes the food resources which are available to the birds. Okay, this leads to fewer small seeds, which is reducing the amount of small seeds that the birds can eat. So if you're a smaller bird with a smaller bill, you're going to have trouble eating larger seeds, but because your bird population ate all of those small seeds, the large seeds are all that remains. So over time, because those birds ate those small seeds, there are only large seeds left, and this reciprocal thing happens where the bills of those birds starts to become larger and larger, and it reverses. And now the plant population is a selective pressure that is acting on the bird population. Okay, and you can see here the bills of these birds are getting larger and larger and larger. This process is called coevolution. Okay, and I think we've talked about this before, but coevolution is the process by which two species undergo reciprocal evolutionary change through natural selection. Okay, this is very often seen in predator-prey relationships. And this is very often seen between flowering plants and their pollinators. When this evolutionary process sort of gets revved up, a lot of plants require pollinators in order to take pollen from one plant to the next. And the plants need to have a way in order to get the pollinators to them. So what systems or what examples can you think of things that plants can use to attract pollinators to them? Uh, Brightly colored flowers is a great way. I'm sure you've seen flowers. They're very, very bright very often. And if they aren't bright, they're probably bright on the UV spectrum, which is something that a lot of insects can see. We talked about this in lab. Flowers will use scents. Okay, they'll smell good or they'll smell attractive to certain pollinators. They also produce nectar, which is basically just sugar that pollinators want to come get. And when they come and get that nectar, they also get pollen on themselves and take it to the next plant. Okay, some animals eat pollen. And again, when the animal visits a flower to get the pollen, to get the nectar, it's going to get pollen on itself and transfer it to the next flower. And here's a pretty fantastic example of some extreme coevolution where you have this hummingbird and this very large plant, this very large flower, where these two have evolved with one another to look sort of wild. In some cases, the relationship of pollinator and pollinatee becomes obligate. A great example of this is the Joshua tree, which we have in Southern California. There's only one species of moth, the yucca moth, that actually pollinates those trees. Okay, and those two are dependent on one another to survive. And what do you think happens if there's a severe decline in one of those, which is actually exactly what's happening with Joshua trees right now? I'm going to let you guys ponder that question. We also have interactions that can negatively affect both species, which lead to divergence of phenotypic characteristics. And the divergence can reduce the intensity of the interaction, and this is often seen in competitive interactions. So you might see something like a bunch of birds with large beaks and a bunch of birds with small beaks, and then they can all eat they can all eat a whole bunch of the seeds. Okay, And that would be two different species competing for seeds with one another. And that results in something called resource partitioning, which I think we may have talked about in class. But next, we're going to be moving on to chapter, or the same chapter, but 12.4. We're going to talk about snakes for a minute.